The morning sun filtered through the Venetian blinds of Lincoln Middle School, casting long stripes of golden light across the worn linoleum floors. The hallways buzzed with the chaotic energy of early September, backpacks swinging, sneakers squeaking, and voices echoing off the cinder block walls painted in faded shades of green and cream. Marcus Thompson walked through those halls with his head slightly bowed, clutching the straps of his backpack like they were the only things keeping him anchored to the earth. He was 12 years old, with warm brown skin, close-cropped hair, and eyes that carried a weight no child his age should know. His uniform polo was slightly wrinkled, tucked hastily into khaki pants that were a size too big, held up by a belt that had been punched with extra holes. He passed by groups of students who barely noticed him, their conversations swirling around topics he couldn't relate to anymore. Summer vacations in Florida, new video game consoles, birthday parties at trampoline parks. Marcus hadn't had a birthday party in 3 years, not since his father left, not since everything changed. The classroom door of room 214 loomed ahead, advanced English with Mrs. Patricia Hendricks. Marcus took a deep breath before pushing through the door, making his way to his assigned seat in the back corner, the one next to the window that overlooked the empty football field and the parking lot beyond. Mrs. Hendricks was already at her desk, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose as she reviewed papers. She was a woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, thin lips that rarely curved into smiles, and eyes that seemed to catalogue every flaw, every imperfection, every reason to be disappointed. 23 years she had taught at Lincoln Middle School. 23 years of declining standards, shrinking budgets, and students who seemed less prepared and more distracted with each passing year. She had stopped believing in potential somewhere around year 15. Now she simply survived, counting down the 18 months until her retirement, until she could finally escape to the small house in Arizona where her sister lived, where she could garden and read and never grade another paper again. The bell rang, sharp and insistent, and the last stragglers rushed to their seats. Mrs. Hendricks stood, smoothing down her navy blue cardigan, and walked to the front of the classroom with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. "Good morning, class. I trust you all completed the reading assignment over the weekend, To Kill a Mockingbird, chapters 1 through 5. We'll be having a discussion today, and I expect everyone to participate." She began pacing between the rows of desks, her low heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Let's start with something simple. Who can tell me about the setting of the novel? Where does it take place, and what is the significance of that location?" A few hands went up tentatively. Mrs. Hendricks called on a girl in the front row who gave a textbook answer about Maycomb, Alabama, and the Great Depression. The teacher nodded curtly, neither praising nor criticizing, and moved on to the next question. Marcus stared out the window, watching a maintenance worker push a lawnmower across the distant field. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in the small apartment on Riverside Drive, where he had spent most of the night listening to his mother practice her speech for the city council meeting, the one where she would be officially sworn in as Millbrook's new chief of police. It had been a long journey to this moment. Sergeant Denise Thompson had worked her way up through the ranks over 15 years, starting as a patrol officer in one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, transferring to Millbrook 5 years ago when she decided Marcus needed a safer environment to grow up in. She had solved cases others had given up on, earned commendations, built relationships with the community, and now, after the previous chief's sudden retirement amid a corruption scandal, she had been selected to lead the department. But Marcus couldn't be at the ceremony. School had started, and his mother had been adamant. Education comes first, always. She would be sworn in at 10 o'clock this morning, and Marcus would learn about it on the evening news like everyone else. "Mr. Thompson." The sharp voice cut through his reverie like a blade. Marcus blinked, turning to find Mrs. Hendricks standing at the end of his row, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of impatience and something colder. "I asked you a question. Perhaps you'd like to rejoin us here in the classroom, instead of whatever daydream you've escaped to." A few students snickered. Marcus felt his face grow warm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hendricks. Could you repeat the question?" Her eyes narrowed. "I asked you to explain the significance of Boo Radley as a character in the opening chapters. But perhaps that's too much to ask of someone who clearly didn't do the reading." "I did read it," Marcus said quietly. "Boo Radley represents the fear of the unknown. The children are scared of him because they don't understand him, because the town has turned him into a monster through rumors and stories. But he's not really a monster at all." For a moment, something flickered in Mrs. Hendricks' eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest recognition that she had underestimated him. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of disdain. "An adequate response. Try to stay with us for the remainder of the class." She moved on, but Marcus could feel her attention returning to him throughout the period, watching, waiting for another slip. The lunch bell released students into the crowded cafeteria, a vast room that smelled of industrial cleaning products and overcooked vegetables. Marcus collected his tray, the standard offering of mystery meat, canned corn, and a carton of chocolate milk, and found his usual spot at a table near the emergency exit, alone. He had friends once, before the move from Chicago, before the divorce that had consumed his parents in bitterness and legal battles, before his father had chosen a new family over his old one and stopped returning calls altogether. The friends he had made in Millbrook were casual, surface level, the kind of people who would nod in the hallway but never invite him anywhere after school. Marcus didn't blame them. He had become quieter over the past year, more withdrawn. It was easier to be invisible than to explain why he couldn't go to the movies or the mall, why his mother worked double shifts, why sometimes he heated his own dinner in the microwave and did his homework alone until 9 or 10 at night. He was halfway through his meal when his phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his mother. "Ceremony went beautifully. I wish you could have been here, so proud of everything we've overcome together. I love you, baby. See you tonight. We're celebrating with pizza." Marcus smiled, the first real smile of the day, and typed back a quick response with a heart emoji. His mother hated emojis, called them lazy communication, but she always made an exception for the hearts. He was putting his phone away when a shadow fell across his tray. "No phones during lunch, Thompson. You know the rules." Marcus looked up to find Mr. Derek Sullivan, the assistant principal, looming over him. Mr. Sullivan was a tall man with a perpetual frown and a reputation for enforcing rules with an enthusiasm that bordered on zealotry. He extended his hand expectantly. "It was just a text from my mom," Marcus explained. "She's being sworn in as police chief today. I just wanted to congratulate her." Mr. Sullivan's expression didn't change. "Rules are rules. Phone goes in the office until the end of the day. You can pick it up after final bell." Marcus wanted to argue, to explain that this was a special circumstance, that his mother had just achieved something remarkable after years of sacrifice. But he had learned that arguing with authority figures rarely ended well. He handed over the phone and watched Mr. Sullivan walk away, feeling something tighten in his chest. The afternoon brought history class, then math, then the long walk through empty hallways to retrieve his confiscated phone. By the time Marcus stepped onto the bus home, the September sun was already beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the windows of downtown Millbrook. The apartment was quiet when he arrived, as it always was. His mother wouldn't be home for hours, not with everything that would come with her first day as chief. Marcus dropped his backpack on the kitchen table, poured himself a glass of water, and started on his homework. At 8:30, the front door finally opened, and Denise Thompson walked in, still wearing her dress uniform, the gold badge on her chest, catching the light from the kitchen. She looked exhausted but radiant, her dark eyes shining with a pride that transcended the fatigue. "There's my baby," she said, crossing the room to wrap Marcus in a hug that smelled of coffee and the faint traces of the perfume she saved for special occasions. "How was school?" "It was fine," Marcus said, the automatic response. "How was the ceremony?" Denise pulled back, holding him at arm's length, studying his face with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years reading people. "It was amazing, Marcus. The mayor spoke about community and healing and new beginnings. The officers were so supportive. I think we're really going to make a difference in this town." She paused, her expression softening. "Now tell me how school really was." Marcus hesitated. He wanted to tell her about Mrs. Hendricks and her cold stares, about Mr. Sullivan and the confiscated phone, about the loneliness that followed him through those hallways like a shadow. But this was her day, her moment. He wouldn't ruin it with his problems. "It was really fine, Mom. Just normal stuff, nothing exciting." Denise's eyes narrowed slightly, the way they did when she suspected someone wasn't telling the whole truth. But she let it go, squeezing his shoulder. "Pizza's on its way, pepperoni and mushroom, your favorite. And tomorrow we start fresh, both of us. New beginnings, remember?" Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. "New beginnings." But as he sat across from his mother at their small kitchen table, watching her eat pizza and recount the day's events with animated gestures, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his new beginning hadn't truly started yet, that something was building on the horizon, gathering force, waiting to break. He just didn't know what it was. The following week settled into a routine that Marcus found increasingly difficult to bear. School became a gauntlet of small humiliations, most of them centered around room 214, and the woman who seemed to have made it her personal mission to remind him of his inadequacy. Mrs. Hendricks had developed a particular interest in Marcus Thompson. She called on him more than any other student, always when he seemed distracted or unprepared. She graded his essays with a critical eye that found fault in every comma, every word choice, every interpretation that deviated from her own. She held him after class to lecture him about potential and wasted opportunities, her voice carrying an edge that felt more personal than professional. Marcus couldn't understand what he had done to earn her attention. He completed his assignments on time. He participated when called upon. He never disrupted class or talked back or caused the kinds of problems that some of his classmates seemed to specialize in. But to Mrs. Hendricks, he represented something. He wasn't sure what. Perhaps it was the way he stared out the window, lost in thoughts she couldn't access. Perhaps it was the quiet defiance in his posture when she criticized his work, the way he didn't crumble or apologize or beg for her approval. Perhaps it was simply that she had spent too many years in that classroom, and the bitterness had to go somewhere. "Your essay on the trial scene was unacceptable," she told him one Friday afternoon, the rest of the class already filing out for the weekend. "You completely missed the point of Atticus's closing argument." Marcus looked at the paper in front of him, covered in red ink. He had received a D-, his lowest grade since arriving at Lincoln Middle School. "I wrote about how Atticus was fighting against an unjust system," Marcus said carefully. "How he knew he would lose, but took the case anyway, because it was the right thing to do." "You wrote a sentimental rambling that ignored the literary techniques Harper Lee employed. This isn't about your feelings, Mr. Thompson. This is about analysis, structure, evidence from the text." "But literature is about feelings," Marcus said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "That's why people read it. That's why it matters." Mrs. Hendricks' expression hardened. "I don't need a 12-year-old to explain literature to me. I have a master's degree from Columbia University. What I need is for you to follow instructions and meet the standards of this class." She thrust the paper toward him. "You'll rewrite this over the weekend. The new draft is due Monday morning. If it's not significantly improved, we'll be discussing your placement in this advanced class." Marcus took the paper, folding it carefully before sliding it into his backpack. He wanted to argue, to defend his interpretation, to ask why she seemed to take such pleasure in his failures. But he said nothing. He had learned that sometimes silence was the only armor that worked. "Yes, Mrs. Hendricks." He walked home that afternoon with the weight of the essay pressing against his back, a physical reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The sky had turned grey, matching his mood, and a cold wind swept through the streets of Millbrook, carrying the first hints of autumn. His mother was waiting when he arrived, which was unusual for a Friday afternoon. She was still in her uniform, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. "Hey, baby, how was school?" The question had become a ritual, and Marcus had become an expert at deflecting it, but something in his mother's expression stopped him. She looked tired, worried, the kind of worried that went beyond the normal concerns of work and bills and single parenthood. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, dropping his backpack on its usual spot. Denise sighed, rubbing her temples. "Nothing's wrong, just a long week. The department is in worse shape than I expected. Budget problems, morale issues, some officers who aren't exactly thrilled about the changes I'm implementing." She managed a small smile. "But that's not your concern. Tell me about your day." Marcus hesitated. He could give her the standard response, the fine that required no further explanation, or he could tell her the truth about Mrs. Hendricks and the essay and the constant feeling of being singled out for reasons he didn't understand. "There's this teacher," he began slowly. "Mrs. Hendricks, she teaches my English class, advanced English." Denise's attention sharpened. "What about her?" "She doesn't like me. I don't know why. She grades my papers harder than everyone else's. She calls on me when she knows I'm not paying attention. She makes comments about my potential, like she's already decided I don't have any." He pulled the crumpled essay from his backpack, smoothing it out on the table. The red marks seemed to glow under the kitchen light. "She gave me a D- on this. I worked really hard on it, Mom. I read the chapters twice. I thought about what I wanted to say, but she said I missed the point, that I was being sentimental instead of analytical." Denise took the paper, reading through the essay and the comments with the careful attention she brought to case files and evidence reports. Her brow furrowed as she turned the pages. "This is good writing, Marcus. Your interpretation is thoughtful and well supported. I don't see how this deserves a D. She said if I don't do better on the rewrite, she might move me out of the advanced class." Denise set the paper down, her expression shifting from concern to something harder, more determined. "Let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Has this teacher ever done anything inappropriate, said anything that made you uncomfortable, treated you differently because of who you are?" Marcus understood what she was really asking. He was one of the few black students in the advanced English class. It was something he had noticed, but tried not to think about too much. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe. Sometimes I feel like she's harder on me than the other kids, but I can't prove it. It might just be in my head." Denise reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Your feelings are valid, Marcus. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But here's what we're going to do. You're going to rewrite this essay, and you're going to make it the best thing you've ever written. Not because she deserves it, but because you deserve to know how good you can be. And I'm going to keep an eye on this situation. If there's a pattern, we'll address it. Together." Marcus nodded, feeling some of the weight lift from his shoulders. His mother had a way of making problems seem manageable, of transforming fear into determination. "Thanks, Mom. That's what I'm here for, baby. Now what do you say we order Chinese food and watch a movie? You look like you could use a break." Marcus spent the weekend working on his essay. He sat at the kitchen table for hours, surrounded by his copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, his notes, and a growing pile of crumpled drafts. He analyzed the literary techniques. He cited the text. He structured his arguments the way Mrs. Hendricks wanted. But he also kept his original interpretation, weaving it through the analysis like a thread of color through gray fabric. He wrote about justice and courage and the importance of fighting for what's right, even when you know you'll lose. He wrote about Scout and Jem and Atticus and the lessons they learned about seeing people as they really are, not as society tells you to see them. By Sunday night, he had something he was proud of. 7 pages, typed and double-spaced, with a bibliography and proper citations. His mother read it over breakfast Monday morning and declared it excellent work. "Whatever grade she gives you," Denise said, "remember that you did your best. That's all anyone can ask." Marcus carried the essay to school with a mixture of hope and dread. He placed it on Mrs. Hendricks's desk before the bell rang, watching her glance at it without expression before adding it to a stack of other papers. He wouldn't get it back for a week of waiting, of wondering, of trying to focus on other classes, while the question of his fate in advanced English hung over him like a storm cloud. When the essay finally returned, covered in slightly less red ink than before, Marcus felt something crumble inside him. A C-, improvement, but barely, and a note at the bottom. Better, but still lacks the analytical rigor expected at this level. See me after class. That conversation was short and painful. Mrs. Hendricks explained that she was recommending Marcus be moved to the regular English class. She said it wasn't a punishment, just a recognition that he might be better served in an environment more suited to his abilities. Marcus listened in silence, nodding when expected, saying nothing that could be used against him. He thought about his mother's advice, about keeping calm and gathering evidence, about not letting his emotions override his judgment. But inside, something was breaking, something that had to do with unfairness and invisibility and the terrible weight of being judged before you've had a chance to prove yourself. He didn't tell his mother about the conversation. She was dealing with her own battles at the department, including a growing resistance from officers who questioned her authority and a city council that demanded immediate results on crime statistics that had been climbing for years. She came home exhausted every night, and Marcus couldn't bring himself to add to her burdens. So he carried it alone. The anger and the hurt and the growing certainty that no matter how hard he tried, some people would never see him as anything more than a problem to be managed. October arrived with colder mornings and shorter days. The leaves in Millbrook turned brilliant shades of red and gold, carpeting the sidewalks and gathering in corners where the wind deposited them. Marcus walked to school through this autumnal beauty, seeing none of it, his mind elsewhere. The incident happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that gives no warning of the extraordinary things about to unfold. Mrs. Hendricks' class was reviewing vocabulary words for an upcoming quiz. Marcus sat in his usual seat, notebook open, pen moving across the page as he copied definitions from the board. He was trying, genuinely trying, to focus and participate and give no ammunition to the woman who seemed determined to see him fail. But his mind kept drifting. His mother had been called to a crime scene early that morning, something serious enough that she had left without making breakfast or saying goodbye. He had woken to an empty apartment and a text message. "Emergency at work. Money for lunch on counter. Love you." Those texts were becoming more frequent. The job was consuming her, leaving less and less time for pizza nights and movie weekends and the conversations that used to be the foundation of their relationship. "Mr. Thompson." The sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Marcus looked up to find Mrs. Hendricks standing over him, her face tight with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're not paying attention, again." "I was copying the definitions," Marcus said, gesturing to his notebook. "See, I have all of them written down." "Copying isn't learning. I asked you a question, and you were clearly somewhere else entirely." "I'm sorry, what was the question?" A few students shifted uncomfortably. The tension in the room had become palpable, a static charge waiting to discharge. "The question was about the word integrity. I asked you to use it in a sentence." Marcus thought for a moment. "My mother has integrity. She always does the right thing, even when it's hard." Something flickered in Mrs. Hendricks's eyes. "That's not an original sentence. That's a cliché dressed up as a personal statement." "It's not a cliché to me, it's true." "Everything is true to someone, Mr. Thompson. That doesn't make it good writing." She turned away, moving toward the front of the room, and Marcus felt something snap inside him. The weeks of small humiliations, the grades that never reflected his effort, the constant implication that he didn't belong in this classroom, it all came rushing up like water breaking through a dam.
"Why do you hate me so much?"
The words hung in the air, shocking in their directness. The classroom went silent. Mrs. Hendricks stopped mid-step, her back still turned. When she faced him, her expression had changed. The mask of professional disdain had slipped, revealing something rawer beneath. Anger, certainly, but also something else, something that looked almost like guilt. "I don't hate you, Mr. Thompson. I hold you to standards. There's a difference. You hold me to different standards than everyone else. You grade my papers harder. You call on me more. You look at me like I'm already a failure, like nothing I do will ever be good enough."
That's quite an accusation.
It's not an accusation, it's the truth. The other students were watching now, their phones forgotten, their attention fixed on the confrontation unfolding before them. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed almost excited, sensing the breaking of some unspoken boundary. Mrs. Hendricks walked slowly toward Marcus's desk. Her heels clicked against the floor in that familiar rhythm, but now it sounded different, ominous, final. "You want to talk about truth? Here's some truth for you. I've been teaching for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of students pass through this classroom. Some of them were brilliant, some of them were struggling, but all of them understood that this is my classroom and my rules apply." She was standing over him now, close enough that he could smell the coffee on her breath. "You come in here with your attitude and your excuses and your sense of entitlement. You think because your mother has some important job, you deserve special treatment. You think the rules don't apply to you." "I never said that. I never asked for special treatment. Your behavior says otherwise. The way you stare out the window like the lesson is beneath you. The way you challenge my feedback instead of accepting it. The way you sit there right now, questioning my fairness in front of the entire class." Marcus stood up from his desk. He wasn't sure why. Some instinct to meet her at eye level, to refuse to be looked down upon anymore. "I challenged your feedback because it wasn't fair. I rewrote that essay exactly the way you wanted, and you still gave me a C-. I've seen other students' papers. I've seen the grades they get for work that isn't as good as mine." "How dare you?" "How dare I tell the truth?" For a long moment, they stood facing each other, teacher and student. The air between them charged with 23 years of frustration on one side and 12 years of pain on the other. Then Mrs. Hendricks did something that would change everything. On her desk sat a plastic water bottle, half full, condensation beading on its surface. In one swift motion, she grabbed it, unscrewed the cap, and threw the contents directly into Marcus's face. The water was cold, shockingly cold. It splashed across his eyes and nose and mouth, soaking the front of his shirt, dripping from his chin onto the desk below. Marcus stood frozen, too stunned to react, the water running down his face like tears. The classroom erupted. Students gasped, some jumping to their feet. Phones appeared from pockets and backpacks, recording the aftermath. Voices overlapped in shock and disbelief. "Oh my God, did she just do that? Are you okay, Marcus?" Mrs. Hendricks seemed to realize what she had done. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something that looked like horror. She stepped backward, the empty bottle still clutched in her hand. I didn't mean..." But whatever she meant to say was lost in the chaos. Marcus wiped the water from his eyes with the back of his hand, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He looked at the woman who had just assaulted him, at the students recording on their phones, at the door that suddenly seemed very far away. And then he walked out. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He simply walked, one foot in front of the other, through the door and into the hallway and out the side exit that led to the parking lot. The autumn air hit his wet face like a slap, but he kept walking, past the buses and the bike racks and the fence that separated school property from the real world. He didn't stop until he reached the small park 3 blocks away, where he collapsed onto a bench beneath an oak tree that was shedding its leaves in the morning breeze. Only then did the tears come. Marcus sat on that bench for over an hour, watching the leaves fall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket, messages and calls from numbers he didn't recognize, but he ignored them all. Finally, one call came through that he couldn't ignore. His mother. "Marcus, where are you? The school just called me. They said you left campus." Her voice was tight with worry, but also with something else, something that sounded like controlled fury. "I'm at Morrison Park, on the bench by the big oak tree."
Stay there, I'm coming to get you.
She arrived 15 minutes later, her police cruiser pulling up to the curb with a precision that spoke of years of practice. She was out of the car before it had fully stopped, crossing the grass with long strides, her uniform somehow making her look larger than she was. When she reached the bench, she didn't ask questions. She simply sat down beside him and pulled him into her arms, holding him the way she had when he was small, when monsters were things that lived under beds and could be banished with a nightlight. "Tell me what happened." So Marcus told her. Everything. The weeks of criticism, the unfair grades, the constant feeling of being targeted, and finally the water, the cold shock of it, the humiliation of having his classmates watch while a teacher lost control. Denise listened without interrupting. Her face remained calm, but Marcus could feel the tension in her body, the way her muscles coiled tighter with each detail of the story. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of every difficult decision she had ever made. "That woman assaulted you in front of witnesses. That's not something that can be explained away or minimized or swept under the rug. Mom, I don't want to make a big deal out of this. I just want it to be over." "It is a big deal, Marcus. What she did was wrong. Not just wrong, illegal, and the fact that you're my son doesn't change that. If anything, it means I have to be even more careful about how this is handled." She pulled out her phone and made a call. Marcus listened as she spoke to someone named Detective Rodriguez, explaining the situation in calm, professional terms that somehow made it sound even more serious than it had felt. "There are videos," Denise said into the phone. "Students recorded it on their phones. We'll need to collect those as evidence, and I want someone from Internal Affairs present for every interview. I don't want any accusations of impropriety because of my relationship to the victim." When she hung up, she turned to face Marcus directly. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking you home. You're going to change into dry clothes and eat something. Then we're going to the station together, and you're going to give a statement about what happened. Everything you told me, you'll tell them. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can do that." "Good. And Marcus, I know this is hard. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but what that woman did cannot go unanswered. Not just for you, but for every other student she might treat the same way." They drove home in silence, the police radio crackling with distant voices, the city of Millbrook rolling past outside the windows. Marcus watched the familiar streets, the shops and houses and churches he had come to know over the past 3 years, and wondered how everything could look so normal when his world had been turned upside down. The apartment felt different when they arrived. Smaller, somehow, more fragile. Marcus changed his clothes mechanically, pulling on a dry shirt and sweatpants, trying not to look in the mirror at the boy who stared back at him. His mother made him a sandwich, which he ate without tasting, and then they drove to the police station, a low brick building on the edge of downtown that Marcus had visited only a handful of times. The interview room was smaller than he expected. A table, 4 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner. Detective Rodriguez was a kind-faced woman in her 40s who explained everything before they began. What would happen, how the recording worked, his rights as a victim. His mother sat beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence, but not so close that it seemed like she was coaching him. She had explained on the drive over that she wouldn't be part of the investigation, that she was recusing herself to avoid any conflict of interest, but that she would be there as his parent, his advocate, his support. Marcus told his story again, The words came easier this time, shaped by the practice of having said them once already. He described the weeks leading up to the incident, the pattern of behavior that had made him dread walking into room 214. He described the confrontation, the accusations, the moment when Mrs. Hendricks had grabbed the water bottle. "I didn't see it coming," he said. "One second she was yelling at me, and the next second I was wet, cold. I couldn't believe it had actually happened." Detective Rodriguez took notes and asked clarifying questions. When did the behavior start? Had he reported it to anyone before today? Were there other students who had witnessed the pattern, not just the final incident? By the time the interview ended, Marcus felt drained, hollowed out, like the words had taken something from him that he wasn't sure he could get back. His mother drove him home again, this time stopping at a drive-through for milkshakes, a rare treat that felt both absurd and necessary. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, sipping the cold sweetness. "Now the investigation proceeds. The school has already been notified. Mrs. Hendricks has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. There will be interviews, evidence collection, and eventually a decision about charges." Charges? Like criminal charges? Assault is a crime, Marcus, even when the victim is a child and the perpetrator is a teacher. Especially then, some might argue. Marcus stared at his milkshake, watching the condensation form on the cup. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to get through the year." "I know, baby. But sometimes the things we don't want are the things that need to happen. Sometimes standing up means standing in the storm." They finished their milkshakes in the parking lot, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The sky was painted in colors that reminded Marcus of the leaves falling from the oak tree, brilliant and brief and impossible to hold on to. The next few days were a blur of attention that Marcus found overwhelming. The videos had spread beyond the school, picked up by local news outlets, shared on social media platforms where strangers debated and discussed what had happened in room 214. The headlines varied in their approach. "Teacher throws water on student during classroom confrontation." "Millbrook Middle School incident sparks outrage." "New police chief's son at center of school controversy." That last one stung. Marcus hadn't wanted his mother's position to become part of the story. He hadn't wanted the focus to shift from what Mrs. Hendricks had done to who his mother was. But the connection was too dramatic to ignore, and reporters chased it with the enthusiasm of dogs after a scent. His mother fielded the calls and the interview requests, declining all of them with a statement that emphasized her son's right to privacy and the ongoing investigation. She arranged for Marcus to stay home for the rest of the week, working with the school to ensure his assignments were sent electronically, giving him space to process what had happened. But staying home meant having time to think. Too much time. Marcus found himself replaying the moment over and over, analyzing every word he had said, wondering if he could have done something differently, if he could have prevented the escalation somehow. On Thursday evening, his mother came home with news. "Mrs. Hendricks has been officially charged," she said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "Assault and disorderly conduct. She'll be arraigned next week." Marcus felt something twist in his stomach. What does that mean? Will she go to jail? Probably not. First offense, no prior record. The charges are misdemeanors. She'll likely plead out, pay a fine, maybe do some community service. But she's finished as a teacher. The school district has already initiated termination proceedings. Good," Marcus said, and then felt guilty for saying it. "I mean, I don't want her to suffer. I just don't want her to do this to anyone else." His mother reached across the table, taking his hand. "That's not cruelty, Marcus. That's justice. There's a difference." The weekend brought a new development. One of Marcus's classmates, a quiet girl named Jessica, who sat in the front row, had come forward with her own story. Then another student, a boy named Tyler from the previous year's class. Then another. It seemed that Marcus wasn't the first student Mrs. Hendricks had targeted. The pattern went back years, a trail of young people who had been criticized and belittled and made to feel worthless in that classroom. Most of them had never said anything, too embarrassed or too scared or too convinced that no one would believe them. But now, with the video evidence and the criminal charges and the spotlight of public attention, they found their voices. "You opened a door," his mother told him. "You made it possible for others to walk through." Marcus wasn't sure how to feel about that. He hadn't meant to be a symbol or a catalyst. He had just wanted to understand why a teacher seemed to hate him, and the question had escaped before he could stop it. The following Monday, Marcus returned to school. The hallways felt different now. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded in recognition. Some offered words of support or solidarity. Others stared with a curiosity that made him uncomfortable, as if he were an exhibit in a museum of controversy. He had been reassigned to a different English class, one taught by a young teacher named Mr. Patterson, who seemed genuinely enthusiastic about literature and teaching. The contrast with Mrs. Hendricks was so stark that Marcus initially found it disorienting. "I read your essay on To Kill a Mockingbird," Mr. Patterson told him after the first class. "The one about justice and courage. I thought it was exceptional." Marcus blinked, uncertain how to respond to praise from a teacher. "Mrs. Hendricks gave me a C-. "I know. I read her comments too. I disagreed with most of them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Teachers are human, Marcus. We make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are about judgment, and sometimes they're about something deeper. What Mrs. Hendricks did was inexcusable, but I want you to know that her behavior isn't representative of this profession. Most of us are here because we genuinely want to help students learn and grow." "Thank you," Marcus said. "That means a lot." The weeks that followed brought gradual healing. Marcus threw himself into his schoolwork with a renewed focus, earning grades that reflected his actual abilities rather than someone else's biases. He started eating lunch with Jessica and Tyler and a few other students who had come forward, forming bonds with people who understood what it meant to be underestimated. His mother's work continued to be demanding, but she made more of an effort to be present. Pizza nights resumed, movie weekends returned. They talked about things beyond school and work, about dreams and fears and the complicated business of growing up. One evening in late November, Denise came home with a manila folder. "The district finished their internal investigation," she said. "They found that Mrs. Hendricks had a pattern of targeting students, particularly minority students and those from single-parent households. There are going to be changes in how complaints are handled, new training for teachers, more oversight. Because of what happened to me, because of what you did about it, there's a difference." She handed him the folder. Inside was a letter from the superintendent, apologizing for what had occurred and outlining the reforms that would be implemented. There was also a certificate of commendation for Marcus, recognizing his courage in speaking up. He stared at the certificate, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The courage hadn't felt like courage at the time. It had felt like desperation, like the only option left when silence became impossible. "I'm proud of you," his mother said, "not because of the certificate or the attention or any of that. I'm proud because you stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That's not something they teach in school. That's character." Marcus set the certificate aside and hugged his mother, holding on longer than he usually did. "Thanks, Mom, for everything." The holiday season arrived with its familiar rituals, transformed by the changes of the past few months. Marcus and his mother decorated their small apartment with lights and a tabletop tree, the same decorations they had used for years, but somehow they seemed brighter now. On Christmas Eve, they sat together on the couch, watching old movies and eating too many cookies, the weight of the year finally beginning to lift. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said during a commercial break. "Always. Do you ever regret taking this job, being police chief? It seems like it's been nothing but problems since you started." Denise considered the question seriously, the way she always did. "There have been hard days when I wondered if I made the right choice, but then I think about why I wanted this job in the first place, to make a difference, to build something better for this community, for you." She smiled. "And I think about everything we've been through this year. If I hadn't taken this job, we wouldn't have moved here. You wouldn't have been in that classroom. Things might have turned out differently for a lot of students." That's a strange way to look at it. Maybe, but I've learned that the difficult things often lead to the important things. The question isn't whether we'll face challenges. The question is what we do when we face them. Marcus thought about that as the movie resumed, as the characters on screen navigated their own challenges toward their own happy endings. He thought about the boy who had walked into Lincoln Middle School in September, scared and alone and carrying burdens he didn't know how to share. He thought about the boy sitting here now, still scared sometimes, but also stronger, also more certain of who he was and what he believed. The winter break passed in a comfortable blur of sleeping late, reading for pleasure, and visits from relatives who lived in other cities. Marcus's grandmother came from Atlanta, filling the apartment with the smell of her cooking and the sound of her laughter. His aunt and cousins drove up from Indianapolis for New Year's, their presence making the small space feel crowded in the best possible way. When school resumed in January, Marcus walked through those familiar hallways with a different stride. Not arrogant, not defiant, but assured. He had faced something difficult and come out the other side, and that knowledge changed how he moved through the world. The news about Mrs. Hendricks had faded from public attention, replaced by newer controversies and scandals. She had accepted a plea deal, as predicted, and was serving community service hours at a local charity. She would never teach again. Her certificate had been revoked by the state licensing board. Marcus didn't think about her much anymore. When he did, it was with something that surprised him: pity. She had spent 23 years in a job that had slowly drained her of compassion and purpose, and the result had been a moment of terrible violence that destroyed her career and reputation. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of bitterness, of letting disappointment curdle into cruelty. He didn't forgive her. He wasn't sure he ever would, but he understood her a little better, and that understanding helped him let go. Spring came early to Millbrook that year, the snow melting by mid-March, the trees budding with new growth. Marcus finished his 7th grade year with honors, his grades reflecting a student who had found his footing after a rocky start. Mr. Patterson had become a mentor, encouraging Marcus to join the school newspaper, where his essay about the incident was published to widespread recognition. Other students reached out, sharing their own stories, seeking advice about how to handle similar situations. "You're becoming an advocate," his mother observed one evening. "Someone people look to for guidance." "Is that a good thing?" "It can be, if you want it to be, but you don't have to carry that responsibility if it's too much. You're still just a kid, Marcus. You're allowed to be selfish sometimes." But Marcus found that he didn't mind the responsibility. There was something meaningful about helping others navigate challenges he had already faced, about turning his experience into something useful. The school year ended with a ceremony that included an award for student leadership, presented by the superintendent himself. Marcus stood on the small stage in the gymnasium, accepting the plaque, looking out at an audience that included his mother in the front row, her face shining with pride. After the ceremony, they walked to the car together, the award tucked under Marcus's arm. "So," his mother said, "ready for summer?" "Ready for anything," Marcus replied. And for the first time in a long time he meant it. Summer unfolded with the lazy warmth of long days and endless possibilities. Marcus spent his mornings volunteering at a youth center downtown, working with younger kids who reminded him of himself not so long ago. In the afternoons, he read books from the library's summer reading list, discovering authors he had never encountered in school. His mother's work continued, the demands of the job never fully relenting, but they had found a rhythm that worked. Breakfast together most mornings, dinner together when her schedule allowed. Quality over quantity, she called it, and Marcus learned to appreciate the moments they had, rather than mourning the ones they didn't. One evening in late July, Denise came home with a thick envelope. "This came for you today," she said, handing it across the table. "From the mayor's office." Marcus opened it carefully, pulling out a letter printed on official letterhead. His eyes scanned the words, widening as he understood what he was reading. "They want me to speak at the back-to-school assembly in August, about standing up against bullying and unfair treatment. They're calling it the Courage in the Classroom initiative." His mother nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "The mayor mentioned it to me last week. I told him it was your decision to make." Marcus read the letter again, processing the implications, standing in front of the entire student body, sharing his story not in a newspaper article, but in his own voice, becoming, publicly and officially, the face of something larger than himself. "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to, but can I tell you what I think?" "Always." "I think you've already done the hardest part. You stood up when it mattered. You told the truth when it was scary. This is just doing the same thing on a bigger stage." She paused. "And I think there are kids out there who need to hear that it's possible to speak up and survive, maybe even thrive." Marcus thought about Jessica and Tyler and the others who had come forward after him. He thought about the letters he had received from students at other schools, students who had read about his story and found courage in it. He thought about the boy he had been a year ago, sitting alone at that lunch table, carrying his burdens in silence. "Okay," he said, "I'll do it." The weeks leading up to the assembly were filled with preparation. Marcus wrote and rewrote his speech, practicing in front of his mirror, his mother, even his grandmother via video call. He worked with a communication coach the district provided, learning to project his voice and maintain eye contact and channel his nervous energy into passion. The morning of the assembly, he woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep. He put on his best clothes, the shirt and tie his mother had bought for the occasion, and stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. He looked older than he remembered, more serious. The boy who had walked into Lincoln Middle School a year ago was still there, somewhere in the eyes, but he was surrounded now by someone stronger, someone who had learned that surviving difficulty wasn't just about endurance, it was about transformation. The gymnasium was packed when Marcus arrived. Students filled the bleachers, their voices creating a wall of sound that made his heart race. Teachers lined the walls. Parents sat in chairs arranged on the floor, cameras and phones at the ready. Principal Rodriguez introduced him with words that sounded distant through the rushing in his ears, something about courage and leadership, and the importance of speaking truth to power. Then she stepped aside, and the microphone was his. Marcus walked to the podium on legs that felt strangely disconnected from his body. He placed his notes on the stand, looked out at the sea of faces, and began. "A year ago, I was sitting where you're sitting now. I was scared. I was alone. I was dealing with a situation that seemed impossible to talk about, impossible to fix, impossible to survive." His voice steadied as he spoke, finding its rhythm, drawing strength from the words he had practiced so many times. "A teacher threw water in my face in front of my entire class. It was humiliating. It was scary. It was something I never could have imagined happening to me. But what happened before that incident was almost worse. Weeks of being singled out, criticized, made to feel like I didn't belong, weeks of wondering what I had done wrong, why I was being treated differently than everyone else." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I'm not here to tell you that standing up is easy. It's not. It's terrifying. When I asked my teacher why she seemed to hate me, I had no idea what would happen next. I just knew that I couldn't be silent anymore, that the silence was eating me alive." He looked at the students in the bleachers, trying to meet their eyes, trying to connect. "Some of you are dealing with situations right now that feel impossible. Maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a classmate, maybe it's something at home that you can't talk about. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that speaking up will fix everything. Sometimes it makes things harder before it makes them better, but I can tell you that your voice matters, that what you're experiencing is real and you deserve to be heard." He took a breath. After what happened to me, other students came forward. Students who had been treated the same way, but never said anything. Some of them had been suffering for years, believing that they were alone, that no one would believe them, that speaking up would only make things worse. But when one person speaks, it gives others permission to speak too. That's how change happens. Not through one big moment, but through 1,000 small acts of courage that add up to something transformational. He glanced at his notes, then set them aside. The rest had to come from somewhere deeper. I'm not special. I'm not particularly brave. I'm just a kid who reached a breaking point and said something he couldn't take back. But I'm standing here today because I believe that each of you has the same capacity for courage. Each of you has a voice that deserves to be heard. And each of you has the power to make this school, this community, this world a little bit better by refusing to accept unfairness in silence. He stepped back from the microphone, his part finished. The gymnasium erupted in applause, the sound washing over him like a wave, carrying with it something that felt like healing. Afterward, there were handshakes and photographs and interviews with local reporters. Marcus answered questions on autopilot, his mind still processing the magnitude of what he had done, speaking to hundreds of people about his most painful experience, making himself vulnerable in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. His mother found him in the hallway as the crowd dispersed. "That was incredible," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. I almost backed out 3 times. But you didn't, that's what matters." They walked to the car together, the late summer sun warming their faces. Marcus felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. The weight of secrecy and shame had been lifted, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. "Mom?"
Yeah, baby?
"Thank you for everything, for believing me when I told you what was happening, for making sure it was handled right, for letting me make my own choices about how to deal with it." Denise stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "That's what parents are supposed to do. We protect our children, but we also help them become people who can protect themselves. You've done that, Marcus. You've become someone who can stand on his own. I couldn't have done it without you. Maybe, but the courage was always yours. I just helped you find it." The new school year began with Marcus in 8th grade, his final year at Lincoln Middle School before the transition to high school. He walked through those familiar hallways with confidence now, knowing where he fit, knowing who he was. The Courage in the Classroom initiative had expanded, becoming a district-wide program with training for teachers and resources for students. Marcus served on the Student Advisory Committee, helping to shape policies and practices that would protect future generations from what he had experienced. His friendship with Jessica and Tyler and the others had deepened over the summer, becoming the foundation of a social network that felt authentic rather than forced. They ate lunch together, studied together, supported each other through the ordinary challenges of adolescence. Mr. Patterson had nominated Marcus for a creative writing program at the local community college, a summer course for gifted students that would give him college credit and exposure to more advanced material. The acceptance letter arrived in October, another step on a path that was becoming clearer with each passing month. But the most significant change was internal. The boy who had once carried his burdens in silence had become someone who spoke freely about difficult things, not recklessly, not without thought, but openly, honestly, with the understanding that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. One afternoon in early November, Marcus found himself standing in the hallway outside what had once been room 214. It was a regular English classroom now, taught by a different teacher, filled with different students. There was nothing remarkable about it, nothing that would suggest the history it contained. But Marcus remembered. The window where he used to stare out at the empty field, the desk in the back corner where he had sat, invisible and alone. The moment when cold water had struck his face and everything had changed. Strange, isn't it? He turned to find Mr. Patterson approaching, his messenger bag slung over his shoulder. What is? How a place can hold so much history, yet look exactly the same as any other place. Marcus nodded slowly. I was just thinking about that, about how different everything is now, even though the room hasn't changed at all. That's because the change was in you, not the room. The external world is just a stage. The real drama happens inside us. They stood together for a moment, teacher and student, looking at an ordinary door that had once been the entrance to something terrible. Do you ever think about her? Marcus asked. Mrs. Hendricks? Mr. Patterson considered the question. Sometimes. I think about how she got to that point, 23 years of teaching, and it ended like that. There's a lesson in there somewhere about taking care of yourself, about not letting the job consume you. I think about her too. Not a lot anymore, but sometimes. I wonder if she ever understood what she did wrong, or if she still thinks she was justified. Does it matter? Marcus thought about it. Not really. What matters is that she can't hurt anyone else, and that the students who were affected are getting better. Mr. Patterson smiled. That's a mature perspective, more mature than most adults I know. I've had a lot of practice with mature perspectives lately. They laughed together, the sound echoing down the empty hallway, and then went their separate ways. The year continued its march toward summer. Marcus excelled in his classes, earned recognition for his writing, and helped plan the end-of-year assembly that would celebrate the district's new anti-bullying initiatives. He was asked to speak again, and this time he said yes, without hesitation. His mother's work had stabilized, the initial chaos of her first year as chief giving way to a rhythm that allowed for more time at home. They had developed routines that worked for both of them, small rituals that kept them connected despite their busy schedules. On the last day of 8th grade, Marcus walked out of Lincoln Middle School for the final time. He paused at the bottom of the steps, looking back at the building that had been the site of his worst moment and his greatest growth. It was just a building, brick and glass and concrete, aging in the way all buildings age. But it was also a monument to something he had learned about himself, that he could survive difficulty, that he could turn pain into purpose, that he could speak when speaking was hard and be heard. His mother was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car, still in her uniform from a morning shift. "Ready to go?" she called. Marcus jogged toward her, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Ready for anything," he said. And this time he knew it was true. High school arrived with its new challenges and opportunities. Marcus enrolled in the honors program, joined the debate team, and continued his work with the student advisory committee that had grown into a citywide organization. The skills he had developed through his ordeal served him well. Public speaking, advocacy, the ability to turn difficult experiences into stories that connected with others. His mother was promoted to a regional position, overseeing police departments in 3 counties. The job was demanding but fulfilling, and she handled it with the same combination of strength and grace that had defined her entire career. They moved to a slightly larger apartment, one with room for Marcus to have a proper desk and bookshelves. He filled those shelves with books about leadership and social justice, about people who had faced challenges and transformed them into change. The summer before his sophomore year, Marcus received an invitation that surprised him. The National Association of Student Councils was hosting a conference in Washington, D.C., and they wanted him to deliver a keynote speech about student advocacy and anti-bullying initiatives. He stood in the conference room of a downtown hotel, looking out at 500 students from across the country, and told his story one more time, about a teacher who had lost her way, about a moment of cold water and hot shame, about the choice to speak up and the consequences that followed. But this time, the story had a different emphasis. It wasn't just about what had happened to him, it was about what happened after. The other students who came forward, the policy changes that followed, the ongoing work of creating schools where every student felt safe and valued. Change doesn't happen because of one person, he told them. It happens because of communities, because of people who see something wrong and refuse to accept it. Each of you has the power to be that person in your school, your neighborhood, your world. The question is whether you'll use that power or let it go to waste. The applause that followed was overwhelming, a wall of sound that seemed to lift him off his feet. But what meant more were the conversations afterward, the students who approached him with their own stories, their own struggles, their own determination to make a difference. One girl, a sophomore from a small town in Oregon, told him about a teacher who had been making inappropriate comments about female students for years. Another student, a junior from Miami, described a bullying situation that the administration refused to address. A third, a freshman from rural Kansas, talked about feeling invisible in a school that seemed designed for people who weren't like him. Marcus listened to each of them. He offered advice where he could, resources when he knew of them, and always the same core message: you are not alone. Your voice matters. Speaking up is hard, but it's worth it. The conference ended, but the connections didn't. Marcus stayed in touch with dozens of the students he met, forming a network that spanned the country. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated victories, and built something that felt larger than any individual could create alone. His senior year arrived with the weight of transition. College applications, scholarship essays, decisions about the future that would shape the rest of his life. Marcus applied to schools with strong programs in public policy and education, writing personal statements that drew on his experiences without being defined by them. The acceptance letters came in spring, including one from a university known for its commitment to social justice and community engagement. Marcus chose it without hesitation, knowing it was where he needed to be. Graduation day was warm and bright, the sun casting long shadows across the football field where the ceremony was held. Marcus sat with his classmates, listening to speeches about potential and possibility, thinking about how far he had come since that first day at Lincoln Middle School. When his name was called, he walked across the stage with the same steady stride he had developed over years of practice. His mother was in the audience, along with his grandmother and aunt and cousins, all of them cheering loud enough to be embarrassing in the best possible way. After the ceremony, they gathered at the apartment for a celebration. Marcus looked around at the people who had supported him through everything, feeling a gratitude that words couldn't capture. His mother found him on the small balcony, looking out at the city that had become home. "Penny for your thoughts." Marcus smiled, just thinking about how much has changed, about who I was when we first moved here and who I am now. "And who is that?" He considered the question. Someone who knows that difficult things don't have to break you, someone who believes that speaking up matters, someone who understands that the people around you make all the difference. Denise nodded, her eyes shining. "That sounds about right." They stood together as the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in colors that reminded Marcus of autumn leaves and new beginnings. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and exciting, full of challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had learned that fear was something you carried with you, not something that stopped you. He had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And he had learned, most importantly, that he was never really alone, that his mother was always in his corner, that his community would rise to support him, that the bonds he had built would carry him through whatever came next. Marcus took a deep breath of the evening air and smiled. He was ready for anything.